Back in 2021, things in Afghanistan were taking massive changes. We had been at war. Our troops had been over there for the last 20 years. President Trump had decided to get our troops out of there, and they were evacuated. They had already evacuated about 200,000 people from Afghanistan. They knew when they left, the Taliban was going to take it over. In Kabul, where their largest airport was, that's where the last people were trying to get to so they could get out of the country before the Taliban took over. It was interesting what was happening. The airport was a safe place because the U.S. military was in there. The Marines were taking care of people. And they knew the only way they could get to the airport was through the Abbey Gate. And to get to the Abbey Gate in Kabul, Afghanistan, they had to walk through a sewage trench. It was raw sewage, but it was down below ground level, so they wouldn't get shot at as much if they went through. There was a large crowd of people every day trying to get to the airport, to get through the Abbey Gate, because they knew if they made it into the airport, they would be safe. They would be protected by American military people. And a lot was going on. They got most of the Americans out. There were a few stragglers, though. There was a lady there who had come from Australia. She had been working with a world class skateboarder, and they started a skateboard ministry for the kids in Afghanistan. And it was especially meaningful for the little girls because not only did they get to skateboard, they were learning things, they were educating them, they were helping them so much. And she needed to get out of town. She knew some of the Marines there at the airport, and she'd gone the day before and she tried to get on the airplane. She got all the way through the airport, out on the tarmac, was trying to board the plane. They said, "We're sorry, we've made a mistake. We have no more seats. You cannot get on the plane." So she had to come back. She talked to her Marine friends and said, "Hey, I think tomorrow may be my last chance to get out. Can you guys help me?" They said, "Yeah, when you come back tomorrow, carry a red umbrella. We'll be watching for you." They saw her in the crowds. They saw the red umbrella. A couple went out, got her, helped her get onto the plane safely out of there. On August 26th, one of the Taliban suicide bombers strapped 25 pounds of explosives to his body, covered it up with his clothing, went to the Abbey Gate, and exploded himself. It killed 10 Marines, one U.S. Navy guy, one Army guy, and over 100 people from Afghanistan. That was what he chose to do that day. The very next day, the U.S. military finally got all of their people on planes and out of there. The Taliban came into the airport. They were shooting their guns up in the air inside the airport, celebrating and proclaiming, now Afghanistan has freedom. I'm not sure that's the kind of freedom I'd be looking for if the Taliban came in right now and shot half of you and told the rest of you, "You got freedom now. We're back in control." It's not looking too good. There was a gate, and that Abbey Gate in Afghanistan was the only way those people could get to freedom. In the scriptures in Matthew 7, Jesus talks about a gate. He calls it a narrow gate. Now, we've been studying the Sermon on the Mount. We've been in for, gosh, since I guess a long time ago, maybe back September when we started. Today, we're at the pinnacle. We're at the top. We're at the apex. This is where Jesus is pulling it all together. He's making it very narrow. And listen to his words in Matthew 7, beginning in verse 12. He says, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few." So Jesus starts out with the golden rule. He has summed everything up. He's brought it down to one sentence. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the apex. That's the point of all of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, all that he's been teaching us. And he's bringing it down to the choices that we have. Today, we're going to be talking about choices and we're going to be talking about contrast because Jesus gives us a lot of contrast. In those few verses I just read, you've got contrast. You've got a narrow gate and a broad gate. You've got a narrow way and a broad way. You've got a one group of people and another group of people. And then you've got one destination and another destination. He's contrasting things. Jesus uses contrast because it helps us see more clearly. I learned this from my girlfriend who's a photographer. She was an equestrian photographer before she became a professional oil painting artist. And she's very artistic. And I remember we used to be in beautiful places in the middle of the day. And I said, don't want you to take some pictures? It's so bright and sunny. Isn't the light great? She said, no. I take pictures early in the morning and late in the evening when the sun's coming in at an angle because the shadows are bigger. It was the contrast. She said everything washes out with too much light. You need the contrast. You need the light and the darkness. When they take pictures, I took a photography course many years ago from Giddings, and it was a portraiture class. And they taught us how to take pictures of people. If you take pictures of people head on, it doesn't look as good as when you use loop lighting. You have something that comes down, throws a little bit of shadow. The light's coming from here, a little bit of shadow on the side of the nose, and you get more contrast, and it just looks like they come alive. First time I bought a diamond ring for somebody, I didn't know anything about buying engagement rings. I talked to my dad. I said, Dad, how do I get a good ring without getting ripped off? He said, I got a friend. So he took me to Irving. It was an industrial neighborhood. We go up to the door. There's not a handle. There's not a doorknob. It's just a glass door with a keyhole in it. We push the bell. Somebody asks us who we are and what we want. We announce we have a reservation. We've made an appointment with Fern. And so the guard comes to the door. Big guy, great big gun on his hip, looks at us, checks us out, has us say our name again. He looks at his list. He unlocks the door, lets us in, looks both ways before he shuts it and locks it back. They take us into this place. Fern, who was my dad's friend, comes out and he says to her, could you educate him about diamonds? He's never bought a diamond before. She said, I could, but Mr. Lowenstein could do it even better. Let me go get him. So she took us into the viewing room at International Diamonds, and he comes out. He has a glass canister or a glass display case there. It's empty. And he gets a black velvet piece of foam padded covered thing just to show diamonds on. Now, there are diamond lights up there. He got this black, nice cloth, and he reaches in his pocket, gets some diamonds. He pours them out. Said, do you see anything there that interests you? I thought, sir, those are absolutely gorgeous. But I'm a youth minister and I'm on a low budget. And he said, but do you like the way they look? I said, yeah, they're gorgeous. He said, they're trash. This is what you get at the mall when they're having a big sale. He said, you don't want these. And he said, let me show you. He reaches under the cabinet. He pulls out a white piece of typing paper. It's 25% rag content that's uber white. He slides it between the black cloth and these diamonds, and all of a sudden, they look very yellow. Contrast. And then he said, now let me show you some good diamonds. So he rakes those off the piece of paper, puts them in an envelope, gets another envelope out, pours it out on top of the white paper. Now the paper looks yellow compared to the diamonds. It's a matter of contrast. Look where Jesus has been. What he's talking about, this narrow gate, this narrow path, two destinations, one leads to destruction, one leads to life. The one that leads to life, the crowd is few. The one that leads to destruction is many. He's given us a lot of contrast, but we go back and we realize They're two different kinds of people. And it's not necessarily Christians and pagans. He shows us contrast. You might remember there were the Pharisees and the scribes. This comes down to Jesus versus the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, keep in mind, they were God's people. They were the teachers of the law. They were the religious leaders of their day. But what they had done over century after century after century is they'd taken God's standard and they'd reduced it and got it down to human level where they could keep the law. In fact, they took the Ten Commandments and expanded them up to 613 rules and regulations. And then they shifted from the love of God to the law of God. They shifted from the relationship with God to the rules of God. And Jesus is coming to set them straight. He said, look, they do the same things we do. They fast, they pray, they give money. We fast, we pray, we give money. What's the difference? The heart. They were doing these things that God told them to do, to fast, to pray, to give, but they were doing it for themselves. They were doing it to make themselves look better in the eyes of people. They were doing it to manipulate God. God, look at all that I do. I've kept all the law. You remember the two people that went in the temple to pray. One of them, a publican. He's the kind of guy, he's the kind of guy that he's very religious, and he looks around and he said, oh God, patting himself on the back. Thank you that I'm not like other men. Thank you that I fast and pray and give alms. Thank you that I'm not like other people. Now, there's a tax collector, low life, and he's beating his chest and saying, oh God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You might know who Elizabeth Elliot is. Her husband was a missionary that had gone to an indigenous tribe of cannibals. And the second time he went back to see them, to share the gospel with them, they filled him full of arrows and killed him. But his wife carried the torch. In one of her books, she tells a story. This story is not true. This story is not in the Bible. This will get you in trouble. When I was growing up, I didn't know the difference between Scripture and Benjamin Franklin. Like God helps those who help themselves, and cleanliness comes next to godliness. I heard that so much from my mom, I just assumed it was in the Bible. It wasn't. I don't want to get you guys in trouble, but she tells the story. Jesus was out with his disciples, and they came to a nice stream. They'd been walking for a long time. They take a break. When they get up to go, he said, would each of you carry a rock for me? So they look in the river and they all get a rock. Now, Peter, he finds the smallest little pebble he possibly can, puts it in his pocket, and off they go. They've been going for about 4 or 5 hours. They're tired. They're hungry. They're ready to rest. They come to another stream. They sit down, and Jesus said, get your rocks out. So they're by this little river. They get their rocks out. He waves his hand, turns their rocks into bread, and they have lunch. Well, some of them had, a good-sized rock that had been some effort, but it turns into a great loaf of bread. Peter had a rock that was about the size of sugar pop. It turned into bread. He got about a half to a third of a bite of bread, and that was his lunch. But Peter was smart. He figured it out. He said, okay, I know what to do next time. So they finish eating, and Jesus asked them again, would you carry a rock for me? Yeah, they're all picking up some good rocks now. They take off. It's time for another break. He says, hey, guys, get your rocks out. They're kind of lighting up thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. He said, throw your rocks in the river. They throw their rocks in the river enthusiastically, can't wait to see what he does. And he looks at him, he says, follow me. And they look at him like, you tricked us. What? No more bread? And then he asks them the question, who were you carrying the rock for? The Pharisees were doing this for themselves. I'm a self-professed recovering Pharisee. As I studied this, I thought most of my life I was 100% them. I did ministry to look good. I needed the approval of people. I needed to feel like I was perfect enough. So this comes down to issues of life. Let me read you a quote from Dr. John MacArthur, probably one of the best living expositors there is on the planet today. He says, someone has well said that all of life concentrates on man at the crossroads. That's really true. From the time of our life when we were old enough to make an independent decision or any decision, life becomes a matter of constant decision making. God gives us choices. Jeremiah 6:16, I really like it in the New International Version. It says, and listen to the verbs here, a lot of verbs. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. He goes on to talk more. He said the contrast is between Christ versus the scribes and Pharisees. The contrast here, and I want you to understand this or you'll never understand the passage, the contrast is not between religion and paganism. I've heard so many people use it that way, that the narrow way is the way of Christianity that goes to heaven, or the broad way is the drunken orgy that's going to hell. It's not a contrast between godliness and Christianity versus irreligious people, pagan people, openly lewd and lascivious, godless, immoral masses on their way merrily to hell. That's not very deceiving. It's not a contrast. Then between religion and paganism, it's a contrast not between righteousness and declared unrighteousness. It is a contrast between divine righteousness and human righteousness, between divine religion and human religion, between true religion and false religion. So we look at the choices that God gives us. Jesus had laid this out. You got two gates, you got two paths, you got two destinations, you got two groups of people. Which one are you going to be? In Deuteronomy 30, verse 19 and 20, and I kind of think this might be the most significant scripture in the entire Old Testament. And I say this because of the way it opens up. It opens up with, this day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. Well, when you think about that, earth, the entire planet, heaven, that's the whole solar system, that's the whole universe. That's a lot. He's saying everything that I've created, I'm calling to listen to what I'm about to say to you. I placed before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that for benefits you and your children may live. You may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. Well, do you realize that just said God is life? Jesus said it, same thing, different words. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. So we're getting real narrow. God tells us what our choices is and tells us to choose the narrow path, and we'll be blessed. When we get to Joshua, Joshua throws down another choice we get to make. In Joshua chapter 24, the last chapter in the scriptures here, in verse 15, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Another choice. In Judges chapter 18, second half of verse 10. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in the earth. God wants us to have a spacious place. This is such a paradox in Jesus' teaching because what happens is the narrow way is the most expansive way, and the broad way becomes the most constrictive way. It's kind of hard to wrap our heads around this. Jesus approaches it differently. This is what separates Christianity from other religions. Now, we're living in a culture, a society today that is incredibly broad. We're into diversity and equality and inclusion of everybody. Well, Jesus said, well, not everybody is going to make it to heaven. And a lot of people don't like that at all. You know, back in my fundamentalist days, I was just kind of happy that you might go to hell because you refused to agree with me. And of course, I knew everything there was to know. And really didn't have a good attitude. It's like, if you're not going to agree with us, then you can just burn. Well, that's not the heart of Jesus at all. Now, keep in mind, Jesus gives us the Sermon on the Mount, and my purpose in it is to see if I can possibly align my heart with God's heart. That's the narrow path, is to love everybody, not wish them hell if they don't agree with you theologically. But you think about this, and Jesus, God, became man to help us understand. All the other major world religions, it's about man gets to become God. Well, I'm probably a decent guy. I don't think I'd be a good God. I struggle to manage my own life. I can't manage my life and yours and this church and this city and this state and this country. It's too big a job for me. But God became man for us. And Jesus won the gate. In Christianity, he says, hey, take the gate. I won it. I have a right to give it to you. It's a narrow gate. You'd never get through it on your own, but because I won, I can let you in. And there's a narrow way. But come first, step through the gate. Just accept me and you'll be saved. That's all there is to it. It's that simple. And then I will help you live your life and make it better. The other human religion, the other human righteousness said, I'm going to do the best I can and hope for the best. I'm going to try to live a good life. And hopefully that will get me in. There's a problem with that, though. If you're hoping you'll be good enough, but you don't know exactly where the cutoff is. Have you ever been cut off? Have you ever been in an election and you lost by a vote or two? Have you ever not have grades that were good enough to get you into something that you wanted to do? It's a bad feeling. I can't imagine living life thinking, okay, it all depends on me rather than it all depends on Jesus. And I'm not going to get to the gate until the end of my life. And I don't know where the cutoff is. Years ago, I got cut off. I was in Dallas. I was looking for a job. I was all dressed up. I used to be a clothes horse. I know that's hard to imagine with flip flops and beard, long hair, and all that stuff. But I used to really dress to the nines. I was all dressed up. Great suit, great shirt, great tie, Mont Blanc pen, pocket square, executive size daytimer. I had all the accoutrements of that yuppie kind of guy. And it was a sales job. And I'd interviewed, and when I was leaving the interview, which went really well, they said they'd get back with me, and I thought they would. There was another guy that saw me coming out of there. He officed in that same building. He probably realized that people coming out that door had just had an interview. And he said, "Excuse me, sir, by any chance are you looking for a job?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, I am." And he said, "I'd love to interview." He handed me a card. He was an executive with NCR, National Cash Register. They were looking for sales. He's trying to put together a new sales team for Dallas. And he said, "You just look like what I'm looking for." And we talked. We had a great visit. He was interested in I just finished Baylor, got a BBA, had a degree in business. He thought you would be absolutely perfect. He offered me the job. And then he said, "Oh, Oh my gosh. I got to ask you one more question. This is new. It just came down from executive leadership that we have to have a 3.0 GPA to hire anybody. I don't like it, but I questioned it and they said there will be no exceptions. So I got to ask, did you have a 3.0 or higher GPA? You seem like you probably did. So, sir, I had a 2.987 GPA at Baylor. He says, man, I'm so sorry. I cannot offer you a job. Can't do it. I was kind of crushed. I had no idea where the cutoff would be. And see, people who don't know where the cutoff is live in fear all the time. God doesn't want us doing that. That's why Jesus said, hey, what I'm offering you is the gate. I will get you in. It doesn't depend on you, it depends on me. It's divine religion, it's divine righteousness. I'm going to take your filthy rag kind of righteousness, which is human, and give you my righteousness. The other people who are trying to live a good life may live a good life, but they don't know where the cutoff is. And I got to thinking for the first time in my life, I've been to three different seminaries, and I'm surprised this never came up before. But heaven is perfect. Wouldn't you kind of think that heaven is perfect? There's no shame, there's no sorrow, there's no weeping, there's no crying. It's all good. And I think everybody in heaven's going to be, they're not going to be any jerks in heaven. How's that going to happen? It's not because of us, because the best people on a bad day are not always nice. And heaven is perfect. That's why you've got to have the righteousness of Christ. Because when we die, that's that final step where he will glorify us. He'll take away all residual sin we might have, and we'll behave ourselves for the rest of eternity in a perfect place called heaven. So we look at that and we understand he gives us a lot of choices, and they're big choices and they're tough choices. John 14:6, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but by me. That sounds narrow. And that's what Jesus was teaching. It is narrow and it's hard. What does it look like to walk on that narrow way? It's difficult because you're supposed to stay in love and joy and peace and gratitude and humility. But you think about all those things that are so hard, those things make you feel better. Remember all the stupid things your parents used to tell you had to do, like clean your plate and get an education? I hated all that stuff. I didn't care. I wanted to play. That was my priority, but they knew what was better for me. And after I got older, I thought my parents were some of the dumbest people God ever made till I was about 25 or 30. I was kind of a slow learner. Figured out they're fabulous people and they've got a lot of wisdom that did not come to them easily, but they lived on that narrow path. They're as good a people as I've ever known. They were really good people. And I just didn't figure it out. So he's saying, hey, come through my gate. Start there. I'll get you in, and then I will help you through the rest of your life. But your salvation is based on me. It's not about you, it's about me. That takes a lot of pressure off of you. Whole lot of pressure. I read something that was a little bit unnerving, and it happens all the time today. There had just been a Billy Graham conference, and somebody had written a letter, and it was published in a newspaper, in the Melbourne Daily newspaper. After the Billy Graham crusade for some years back, this is what the man who wrote the letter said. After hearing Dr. Billy Graham on the air, viewing him on TV, and reading reports and letters concerning him and his mission, I am heartedly sick of the type of religion that insists my soul and everyone else's needs saving, whatever that means. I've never felt that I was lost, nor do I daily wallow in the mire of sin, although repetitive preaching insists that I do. Give me a practical religion that teaches gentleness and tolerance, that acknowledges no barriers of color or creed, that remembers the ages and teaches children of goodness and not of sin. If in order to save my soul, I must accept such a philosophy as I've recently heard preached, I prefer to remain forever damned. And he signed his name. That's the choice everyone makes. You either invent a nice little religion that fits you. It's exactly what the Sadducees and the scribes and the Pharisees had done. They dumbed it down till they could do it in their own strength and their human power. You either invent a nice little religion that fits you, or you take the truth of God and accept it. That's the choice you make. One gives life, the other death. So I look at this narrow path that's very expansive. I look at the broad path that's very constrictive. You might remember David, a man after God's own heart, just was rocking and rolling. Life was so good. Every battle he fought, he won against the bear, against the lion, against the giant, against all the enemies of Israel. He was on a roll. And then he got off the narrow path onto the broad path and started fooling around with Bathsheba, and then had to have her husband murdered. And he didn't deal with that until Nathan the prophet came along and brought it to his attention. He repented. All those morbid Psalms you read, it feels like my bones are drying up. My soul aches. He's having a miserable time because the broad path became extremely constrictive and restrictive, and it makes us suffer. Jesus said, enter the narrow gate, stay on the narrow path because it broadens. In the Chronicles of Narnia, now, there were three kids that were in the back of a closet. This is a book by C.S. Lewis. They're in the back of the closet, and they find there's a secret door in the back of the closet. So they walk in the wardrobe, they part the clothes, they open the door, and they step into a whole nother world. Magical things would happen. The animals would talk. Little children would get to be kings and queens. It was a magical place for them. And they were in Narnia one day. And they were with Tirian, who was the last king of Narnia when the battles were being fought before Aslan finally takes over. And they're being pursued by the enemies of the country. And they're running for their lives. And they see a stable up on the hill. And Tirian, the king, said, hey, we better go in the stable. It's the closest place we can hide out. They see this little stable up on the hill. It's got a roof on it. They think, well, we'll have some shelter there. When they walk in, everybody's looking around. Like as soon as they stepped in this small stable, there was a huge sky, even though it was a roof. They saw this huge sky. They saw beautiful landscape just going as far as they could. And these are the things that they said about it. King Tirian looked around. It seems then that the stable seen from within and the stable seen from without are two different places. Yes, said the Lord Didgeridoo. Its inside is bigger than its outside. Yes, said this child, Queen Lucy. In our world, too, a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world. This is the paradox of the narrow path. It's very expansive. You look at people who live on that narrow path. You look at some of God's best people that lived on that narrow path. You look at Paul and Silas. You could beat them. You could strip them in front of the whole city. You can illegally imprison them, take all their rights as Roman citizens away, and leave them standing in the last guy's urine and feces in this nasty Roman dungeon chained to a wall. They're singing praises to God, because the kingdom within them was so much better than the kingdom outside. That's where the narrow path ends up in life, not destruction. It's a paradox, but when you choose the ways of God, it's expansive. When you choose the broad, easy path, it eventually becomes constrictive and it's not good for you. So Jesus tells us what to do. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Choose the narrow path. The narrow path means you love. You stay in joy and peace and gratitude and humility. It's a narrow path. It's challenging, but it's fulfilling. It's satisfying. It makes us feel better. In 1938, research at Harvard started. Seven different professors over 77 years took control of keeping this research project going. I want to read to you the results. They followed 724 different men. They started back in 1938, and their first group, they got 50% of the people from the sophomore class at Harvard University. The other 50% of that control group came from the most dangerous and poorest neighborhood in Boston. So they got a real diversity of people of all kinds in this group. And this is what they do for many years to follow. Each year, researchers interviewed the participants and their families and reviewed their medical records to identify the factors that might determine longevity of life and happiness. Some 77 years later, 2015, Dr. Robert Waldinger, an MD, went to Harvard Medical School, pretty smart boy, the seventh faculty member to oversee the study, gave a TED Talk and presented the findings of this research. So, what have we learned? He said. Well, the questions aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. As they looked at the happiest and healthiest people from the control groups when they were in their 80s, the researchers found a very solid correlation between health and happiness at age 50 and the depth and quality of their personal relationships. The study concluded that those who are more socially connected to family, friends, and community are happier, physically healthier, and live longer than those less connected. It's not the number of relationships we have, but the quality of our relationships that matter. Relationships are more important to longevity and happiness. Now, listen to this list: than demographics, diet, career, success, exercise, financial resources, or education. Relationships are what makes life worth living. I'm really impressed with this because it's the fastest spreading TED Talk ever. It's had 47 million views because people are interested in health and longevity and happiness. Where does it come from? Relationships. What will make your relationships better than doing unto others as you would have them do unto you? I'll wrap it up with today. Pastor Sean Harder was hiking Golden Ears Mountain in British Columbia. That's usually a 2-day hike. Some people could make it up to the summit and back in a long, hard day of hiking that started early in the morning and went late at night. He decided to do it in 2 days. He'd seen this place before. He'd walked into it on a broad, beautiful path that had bark on the ground. It was soft, it was wide, it was easy. He walked up to a place where the waterfalls were, and there was a rope bridge that went across there, and he was planning on taking the rope bridge. Well, he gets there, parks the car, puts his 50-pound backpack up, starts hiking, comes up there, looking at the waterfall. He was impressed. He saw that, couldn't take his eyes off it. It was so beautiful. And then he looked for the rope bridge, and it was not there anymore. And he looked down and he saw it had broken and it was hanging down on his side. He could not get across. He thought, oh my gosh, I'm just going to have to abort this trip because I can't get across this river. And he turned around on this broad path and he started hiking back and he noticed just a little bit of break in the bushes. There were a lot of blackberries. If you've ever picked blackberries, they have stickers. And there was this little path that was about this wide between the blackberry bushes. And there was an orange piece of plastic that somebody had left on it. And when he walked up to see how far that little path would go, he could see farther down there was another little orange ribbon, and then another one, and another one. He decided to take the narrow path. So he started out on the narrow path. His legs got cut up by those blackberry bushes, but he finally got out of the bushes. Then he came to the narrow path, and it went around on a mountain that was looking down at the river. He went around that, and it was scary because it was narrow. There was not a rail. You've got rocks on this side and the abyss on this side. So he's got this 50-pound backpack. He's walking very, very carefully. He makes it through that. And finally, he's still on a narrow trail, but it leads down to a valley around the river he needs to cross. He gets down there. There are stones in the river. He can walk across. They're like stepping stones. It's easy. He gets across the river and he's thinking, it's so beautiful here. I'm just going to camp here tonight, make the rest of the trip tomorrow. He chose the narrow path, which became very expansive and very beautiful. That's what will happen when we follow Jesus. It's not easy. We have to go against our human nature. The bottom of the bottom lines is it will keep us in love. And if we're not in love, we're going to be in fear. Love feels good, fear feels bad. Choose the narrow way.